Piers Morgan puts a familiar face.
Star of the West End, Ruthie Henshaw and Tim Henman join the girls in 55 minutes. If you missed Tuesday's Loose Women, they're all here after Nightwatch with Steve Scott.
Hello, I'm Steve Scott and this is Nightwatch. Tonight, a crime story from the 1980s and another from a century earlier. Dramatic pictures of an armed siege as a cop killer is cornered the day that life in a Yorkshire village changed forever. And from the 1880s, the Gateshead Ripper, a prostitute murdered in a similar fashion to the Whitechapel victims. Did Jack head north for an extra kill? It was the biggest armed manhunt in British history. More than 800 officers trying to track down a gunman equipped with specialist survival skills and a passion for guns. During his killing spree, SAS dropout Barry Prudom had killed 2 police officers and a man that he'd tried to rob. In the Yorkshire village of Malton, he took a family hostage as the net closed in on him. The story is told with the help of a television reporter who was there in 1982 to cover the Siege of Malton.
The final chapter in the life of Barry Peter Edwards, alias Prudom, has focused on the events surrounding his death on a sports ground only yards from the centre of Malton in North Yorkshire. The inquest heard that an armed police team approached a lean-to where they believed someone was hiding. A single shot rang out. Police took cover and repeated calls were made for the man to give himself up. There was no response, and Chief Inspector Clarkson gave the order to open fire. When I went to the inquest and heard the evidence, one could understand why the police acted in the way that they did. But standing here now, one knows that it simply wouldn't happen in that way today, and that Barry Prudom, I suspect, would have been in court to stand trial.
Barry Prudom died in a crude hideout on the edge of Malton Tennis and Bowls Club. The police barrage was prompted by a single shot from Prudom, which later proved to be to his own head. If Prudom had stood trial, it would have been for multiple murder. Over a fortnight, Prudom shot 3 police officers and a retired couple. June 17, 1982, Warren Point, North Yorkshire. Prudom, on the run from an assault charge, was approached by local bobby PC David Haig. Prudom shot him in the head.
At the spot where PC Haig's body was found, close to his Panda car near Norwood Edge, a similar car was parked in the hope of jogging the memory of drivers who passed on the morning of the murder. In a 3-hour period, 300 cars were stopped and drivers were shown the photo-fit picture of the wanted man.
Prudom fled south to Newark and killed again. On June 23rd, George Luckett died and his wife was severely injured when Prudom burgled their home. He returned to North Yorkshire to hide out in the dense Dalby Forest. June 25th, police dog handler Ken Oliver had the misfortune to approach him and was shot in the back. Now the manhunt went into full swing. Robert Hall, then a young calendar reporter, was scrambled from Leeds to cover the story.
This particular patrol, out ahead of the main search parties, had decided to use a Forestry Commission tower as a vantage point for their sharpshooters. It's 4:30 in the morning and we're with one of the armed police squads that have been on duty in the forest throughout the night. We stumbled across a clearing in the forest where 2 tracks crossed, and there was a fire control tower there and a couple of unmarked police cars, I think from North Yorkshire, and marksmen in the process of climbing up these towers. And around us there were other marksmen crouching in the trees. The fact that they're all armed with loaded weapons and covering one another indicates just how serious the situation in the forest is. You can hear the trepidation in my voice because it was scary. We were surrounded by policemen with guns. For all we knew, Prudom was in the trees with whatever firearms he had, and we were a target. But it didn't happen. It's now mid-afternoon and this is the scene in Dalby Forest. Police are now regrouping to begin a major search elsewhere in the area. There are more and more heavily armed police, and although no direct information is being given out at this stage, the obvious assumption that we're drawing is that senior officers believe the man they're hunting is still in the area.
But in the mist, Prudom eludes the ever-increasing numbers of police searchers. He headed south on foot and on June 28th boldly walked into the market town of Malton. Tragically, it was one of the only unarmed officers in the area who saw him and approached him. Prudom drew his gun, chased the officer across the road and callously shot him in the head. The Chief Constable, Kenneth Henshaw, informed the press on the lawn of the local police station.
The following described man was sighted at approximately 2:10 p.m. He was later stopped and checked by Sergeant Winters, and the incident took place in a field in Old Malton. The man is described as being white, early 30s, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, slim build, thin-faced, sallow complexion, high cheekbones, with 2 days' growth of beard. A man of this description was reported to have been seen running along Yorkers Gate, Malton, and a search took place.
Prudom's escape route is blocked by the river, and there's an army of police on his heels. But he found a disused railway cutting in a place known locally as Willow Wood. It goes in the wrong direction, taking him back past the police search parties. But extraordinarily, he made it. Going under the road bridge next to the police station, he scrambled up the opposite bank of the cutting to what became his final hiding place. Malton Tennis and Bowls Club. Sleepy Malton is now the centre of a national story. The police have discovered the name of the killer and know now he's trained in survival tactics.
He's a very dangerous man. He's a man who has got no regard for human life at all. He's a cold-blooded killer.
Police suspected Barry Prudom wanted to go out in a blaze of notoriety and take as many policemen as possible with him. The hunt for him continues after the break.
It's Harry's second year at Hogwarts.
Do you have any idea how serious this is?
And evil lurks in every corridor.
Spooky.
I smell trouble.
You mark my words, there'll be killings next.
Do you know who's opened the Chamber of Secrets?
An adventure you can't miss.
Don't even think about it.
Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Saturday at 3:25 on ITV1. In a cagey affair at Craven Cottage, Fulham and Tottenham were inseparable in a goalless encounter. Only one team can make it through to the FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley. Now they head to White Hart Lane in a match that must be decided on the night. A must-win FA Cup quarter-final London derby. Tottenham Fulham live, Wednesday at 7:30 ITV1. We are Football United.
Armed survivalist Barry Prudom is on the rampage, seemingly unstoppable, even though 800 police officers, many with guns, are searching for him. He's already killed 2 people, one of them a police officer. It's inevitable he will kill again, with his pursuers being the most likely targets. To catch a survivalist, you need the services of another, so police call in an SAS-trained expert to do the job.
Peter Walker, then the police press officer, was more used to dealing with local journalists and minor incidents. Suddenly, he's got a press pack on his back, asking why, after nearly 2 weeks, ever-increasing numbers of officers can't find a man who appears every few days, kills at will, and then melts away.
Initially, there were 450 officers deployed searching the forest, but once it was after Ken Oliver was attacked, it was when Sergeant David Winter was shot in Malton, that really the hunt intensified by calling in more officers. And then I think that at one point the 800 engaged in the search.
And you've got more armed men?
Yes, we have.
Why is that?
Again, the area is larger, so we do need a greater strength in the area, and we need these swift response teams as well, who will go out to investigate various incidents around the county. Every incident I ought to add is investigated by a team of armed men now.
The manhunt is getting nowhere, but it was Walker's job to be confident, even though he knew every policeman in the area was a potential target.
We're very confident, yes. The indications are that we are getting nearer, and that there's an air of confidence in the police station today.
It looks like he's going to go out in a blaze of what he thought was glory. So he would not surrender. And I think, from what we gathered, he intended taking as many police officers with him as he could before he went.
It's now 7 o'clock in the morning, and the police operation, which has already been underway for some 2 hours, is moving into top gear. Everyone is on the alert. Even the smallest incident is thoroughly checked. Why have you asked the policeman to come and help you this morning?
Because I found some footmarks from our garden to the next door.
It must be quite scary, you knowing that this man could be right around your house.
Oh, I'm only hoping they'll find him. I keep looking around myself.
But none of the leads take the police nearer Prudom. Days pass and no progress is made. Even so, journalists have to file stories. Robert Hall found another angle at the local newspaper.
Instead of the usual news of council rows, agriculture and local events, the news department here are faced with one of the biggest stories the area has ever seen.
It's a very quiet area, it's normally. You know, I can get in touch with the police regularly and nothing, you know, odd stolen car and this kind of thing, but very little happening. And this has obviously just turned everything inside out.
My only aim as a journalist was only ever to report what had happened, not to try to make it happen. But it seemed to me at the press conferences that I went up to, the police there, that there was a bit of a struggle to keep the story interesting, because this man had, you know, was like a rabbit, he'd gone down a hole.
Just as the trail seemed to have gone completely cold, a single shot rang out near the police station. Was Prudom at large again? This time the press, as well as the police, were in the firing line.
Our photographer, I remember, dragged me down to knee level, saying, "You're going to get shot, get your head down." And I thought, no, I'm not. This is not real. You know, that can't happen. It's not going to happen. When I switched the TV on at night when I got there, there's Nicholas Witchell standing there doing his piece to camera, talking about bullets whistling round his ears, you know. And we found out later that the only shot that was fired by the police that day, it actually was an inspector who'd accidentally let off a gun through the roof of the police van. So I don't know where good old Nicholas got his bullets whistling round his ears from.
Whether out of desperation or simply to take police out of the firing line, the chief constable accepted the offer of help from a civilian, ex-SAS man Eddie McGee.
I now have the services of an expert who has extensive knowledge of the art of tracking, and he is now busy. He's found certain marks which give us confidence that he's on the right trail.
McGee's task isn't easy. He's helicoptered to every sighting, dogged by journalists, and frustrated by every location being trampled over.
We'll concentrate like bloody hell, we really are. Because this bastard's going round and round in circles, and on top of that, everybody else is calling us in all directions. So give these blokes a chance.
Are you sure they are?
Our job is to get this bastard, isn't it? One way or the other.
Malton had never seen anything like the Prudom manhunt. It turned the town from rural idyll into hostile inner city, as the police put it under siege. Even the gentle thud of willow on leather was suspended for the duration.
You have to remember this is a really sleepy little North Yorkshire town in the middle of July, and suddenly all this happens. I mean, for example, this cricket pitch, you'd expect the cricket team would have been playing here, but everything stopped because this became an impromptu airfield. Pilots and response teams are growing used to an operation which closely resembles the scrambles so well known by the RAF. An alert, which often follows a phone call from a member of the public, is flashed to Malton police station, and from there by radio to this control caravan. There were sightings all the time, so these helicopters would go up with marksmen on board and they would head off and circle the area that had been identified. To my memory, 2 or 3 helicopters in and out of here, including one that the Metropolitan Police had brought in. Is this the sort of work you'd normally be doing?
Yes, it's very much akin to what we do in London, looking for suspects, persons concerned in crime, and searching areas as necessary.
Of course, you're in a new area. The terrain is new certainly to one of your pilots and to you. Is that presenting any problems for you?
They're going. Yes.
Right.
But of course they were searching in the wrong place. The tennis club is just over the road from the cricket ground. In the old vicarage next to Prudham's hideout, Dennis and Ian Reid were unaware of their new neighbour. Dennis followed events on the police radio, while his son Ian, then Malton's mayor, helped the police with local information from his office at the water board behind the police station.
Policemen arrived with shotguns, with no protective clothing. It was only when they started bringing the big police authorities in, like Manchester and Newcastle and South Yorkshire and metropolitan areas, where they had special firearms units. And that was later on. But up till that point, it was just your normal heartbeat Bobby with a gun.
It was a group, without being rude, a group of amateurs. It would be sighted all over the place. A scarecrow was sighted, and they sent a helicopter to look at it and found it was a scarecrow. Well, it should never have been reported. It was, I don't know whether it was over-enthusiasm or just an attempt to see a bit of action in our corner, you know.
Under certain rather mysterious circumstances, I thought at the time, the Chief Constable of Manchester sent his chauffeur-driven car, which came to the water board, not the police station, and he opened the boot and it was full of Armalite rifles, which I recognised. There was some pretty awesome firepower.
People had never seen 1,000 policemen all at once before, never mind all the sophisticated armoury, and, you know, it was quite something for Malton.
Good morning.
Nice morning.
It is. You're off shopping, are you?
No, I'm going to open my house out, you see. I'm locked up. See if there's any mail for me. And, you see, we're both widows, so we've coupled up. I came up here to sleep, you see, and I'm going down just to draw the curtains and see if all's okay and see if I've got a letter from my family.
Are you happy wandering down there on your own?
Why, someone's going with me, ain't they?
You'd like me to come?
Yes.
OK.
Just to see me into the...
Have you been worried at night? Have you managed to get any sleep?
Well, night before last, I never closed my eyes, but I've had a better night because I took a sleeping tablet last night and we had early night and there we are.
What do you think to this man that they're all looking for?
Oh, I don't know. If I had a gun, I would shoot him.
The press had dubbed the Prudom story the Siege of Malton, and it was a siege that affected everyone's lives.
What struck us as journalists, and when you think about the way they deal with firearms things now, was that it was all felt a bit chaotic, to be honest.
It was a bit unnerving when you went out in a pickup like we did. You would get to Old Malton and you'd be stopped, and there'd be a policeman there with a gun pointing at you and a man with a clipboard. Who are you? Who are you working for? Where are you going? What time do you expect to be back? I can see that gun now with the man's trigger on, and I don't know, it was a bit iffy.
And you suddenly have a helicopter following you around until you end up at your own house. And when you think about it, in July, the amount of undergrowth and the amount of stuff that's growing here, you could last for a long, long time.
It all seemed to revolve around where he'd been supposedly seen last.
Yeah, because they were dashing about.
Yeah.
They kept getting these reports. I remember these convoys of police cars all dashing out, then they'd come back and out again.
Well, a lot of people were saying, get down into Willowwood, weren't they? Yeah. It'll be down at Willowwood, go down into Willowwood, but no, they wouldn't.
The only place they didn't look where they should have looked was under that railway bridge up Old Malton Road, within 50 yards at police station.
I walked every day across the railway cutting and on my way to a police press conference, and I'd look over it, and every day I thought to myself, that's a great place to hide. But unlike, TV reporters in dramas, I did nothing about it. I didn't even mention it to anybody, you know. And that's the very place where he was.
Prudom emerged from hiding just once. On July 3rd, he walked 50 yards to a house behind the tennis club where he'd been stealing cat food from an outbuilding to survive. He took a family hostage for 12 hours, but they talked to him, made him tea and sandwiches. He left them alive, thanked them for what he called his last supper, and returned to his hideout. Next morning, McGee followed his tracks, and they led straight to his den.
And I went forward on my hands, feeling the ground, until I saw this little bit of a blue plastic bag, what looked like a plastic bag, just casually move to one side. And I didn't pay too much attention to it because I was actually looking for tracks. And I went forward, I changed probes like that. I put my hand forward to lift up this probe, and as I put my hand just inside this rough shelter where the wood was, suddenly the foot flew back, and the foot hit me on the knee, sent me strolling back. And I jumped up in the air, the officer was over there, and I didn't shout, I said, "He's there!"
It wasn't McGee's job to tackle Prudom. That task fell to Chief Inspector David Clarkson and his team of 4 firearms specialists from West Yorkshire.
I put a containment round him, firearms containment round him, myself being the pistol. My second was with the shotgun, and further back with the rifle was the sniper. There was no, what can I say, positive evidence to say that the man behind that screen was in fact Prudom. Nobody had seen him. So it wasn't up to me to go in, even though it killed 3 people. It wasn't up to me then to go in and say, look, give yourself up or you're dead. There's a ravine there, which I think come from the old railway sidings. Next thing we know is North Yorkshire suddenly come up at the side of us, right in our line of fire, should anything go wrong. We discovered that the North Yorkshire firearms response teams was on a different wavelength to ourselves, so consequently we couldn't talk to them. Absolutely frightening. I decided that I would go around the back to a wall, so it got me behind the wall where the lean-to was obviously leaning. And looking over the wall, and as I'm stretched, because it's a fairly thick stone wall, as I'm stretched over the wall, boom, the shot went off. Now I, for one, thought he was at me. And so I dropped down, obviously, frightened to death. A stun grenade was dropped in, but it made no difference, none whatsoever. So again, I spoke to Prudom, as it turned out to be. I said, look, give yourself up, and let's talk things through, just trying to get him communicating. Nothing happened, and it might seem a long time, but this is a matter of a minute at the most. And so I thought, right, fire. So my shotgun man fired, and at the same time, of course, the North Yorkshire officers fired as well. Everybody gets hyped up and the adrenaline flows. It's no different to any other job. When the adrenaline flows. Yeah. And the trauma what can I say, of dealing with a thing like that is something that I don't wish anybody to experience. No.
When the jury returned, their verdict of suicide was unanimous. As police fired at him, Barry Peter Edwards had been dead. Summing up, Coroner Michael Oakley thanked police and public, and he closed with a comment directed at all the families connected with the case. We should not forget, he said, all those who've suffered and will continue to suffer after this inquest has been closed.
I think there's a feeling of, obviously a feeling of sadness for his victims, but I think there's also a feeling of regret, certainly as a journalist, that you never heard his story, you never heard why this had happened, what had happened in this man's life to turn him and make him do these dreadful things. And we all wanted to know that, and I suppose in a way we felt cheated.
We knew that he was a killer. We knew that you couldn't take a risk with him. And that's why at the end of the day, I wasn't prepared to take a risk. I know other people have different ideas, but that's what I thought, yeah.
The Siege of Malton in 1982, which put a small town on the map for all the wrong reasons. After the break, we're back to the 1880s, during Jack the Ripper's reign of terror in London. Hundreds of miles away in Gateshead, the mutilated body of a prostitute is discovered. Has Jack found a new hunting ground? Back in a moment.
Consider what makes a man a legend. They're good, but they also can be bad. They're the heroes and villains, portraying the best and worst of all our emotions. They stand apart. Their stories incredible, their characters indelible. They are legends. Screen Legend season continues with Scarface, tonight at 10 on ITV4.
I seem to have spent most of my life with the worst things that people do to each other.
Inspector Frost returns over 2 nights for his final case.
Be careful about making it too personal, Jack. I intend to make my problems his problem. He should be inside already.
And it's very personal, for all sorts of reasons.
I've been here before.
So, will his past catch up with him? The last ever Inspector Frost episodes, coming soon to ITV1.
On the smoggy streets of London's poor Whitechapel district, a man dubbed Jack the Ripper was terrorising the prostitutes who worked there. Girls were snatched from the street and then killed and mutilated in a very specific way. So, when a dead prostitute was discovered hundreds of miles away in the north of England, killed in an identical way, it was easy to jump to conclusions. Kim Inglis investigates the intriguing tale of the Gateshead Ripper.
On a September morning in 1888, a miner made a horrifying discovery on his way to work. What he saw had him running for the police, but it was already too late for the young woman lying by the colliery railway line in Birtley in Gateshead. The victim had been strangled and then mutilated. There was little sign of a struggle, suggesting she knew her killer and wasn't expecting the savage attack which followed. Whoever carried out this deed seemed to be a maniac with a hatred of women, and the murder couldn't have come at a more terrifying time as the country was gripped by the crimes of Jack the Ripper. But did Jack the Ripper strike on Tyneside? We examined the evidence that suggests he was here. We've also found some tantalising new clues about the identity of one of Britain's most feared serial killers. The victim was local girl Jane Beardmore, the unwed mother of 2 children. People said she'd never been too fussy about the men who kept her company, but the police weren't interested in her way of life. It was the manner of her death that intrigued them.
Obviously, the principal thing of Jack the Ripper's crimes was that he mutilated the bodies. But it's almost certain that he first strangled the victims and then cut the throat. This explains why there was very little blood around, and so that it didn't spurt because the heart had stopped beating.
The Ripper had already claimed at least 3 lives in London's East End. All had been women of ill repute, and they'd all been killed in the same way. Soon, whenever a murder happened anywhere in Britain, the whisper went round that it was the work of Whitechapel Jack. The London police dismissed these reports, but the panic went on. Suppose Ripper crimes were springing up all over the country, causing widespread hysteria, but this one was different. This time the Ripper squad sat up and took notice.
Most of the crimes that were attributed to the Ripper that took place outside of London, when you look at them, you find that they were basically just stabbings and so forth, so that none of those crimes really seem to have been taken very seriously by the Metropolitan Police, by Scotland Yard. The single exception to that would be the Gateshead murder. We know that that was taken seriously by Scotland Yard because they sent one of their senior policemen, Inspector Roots, and Dr. Phillips, who had performed one of the post-mortems. So we know that the police at that time thought there were great similarities, at least initially, between the Gateshead victim and the Jack the Ripper victims. We also know that this crime was distinct from others in the country because there's a press report in which the journalist took a tour around the East End, and he particularly went to the two murder sites as existed at that time at Bucks Row and Hanbury Street, because this took place after the second of the Ripper crimes, and found that people there didn't seem to be that alarmed, they weren't that frightened. And in Hanbury Street he asked somebody why that was, and the person said, well, they all think Jack the Ripper's gone to Gateshead. So the Gateshead crime had obviously made a big impact in London, including the very heart of the Ripper's killing ground.
So the Ripper squad took the train north and carried out an investigation. They spent a day or two looking around for clues, but their examination of the evidence seems to have been quite cursory. But the London experts weren't convinced. They went home and the local police cast around for another suspect. They soon found one. Jane had a boyfriend, William Wardell, and he hadn't been seen since the killing. A manhunt was launched for Wardell. Meanwhile, there were formalities to be got through, a post-mortem and an inquest. Following the custom of the times, a local pub was the venue for the inquest. There could be only one verdict: murder by person or persons unknown. On the day of the funeral, a massive crowd followed Jane Beardmore's coffin from her home. She was laid to rest at St John's Church in Birtley. But the Ripper theory wouldn't die, and it was about to get a boost. A letter had been received and published by the Evening Chronicle in Newcastle. It read, "I have come into Newcastle now to put away about 12 of the prostitutes that walk the streets. I will commence at Pink Lane with my work, as my knife is in splendid form. I intend doing more than I have done in Whitechapel." But the police and the press got many letters during the time of Whitechapel Jack. Some turned out to be hoaxes, and some experts believe they all were.
Letters were sent to the police all around the country from people claiming to be Jack the Ripper, and in a few instances we actually know who sent the letters, and that people were prosecuted for writing bogus letters and sending them to the police. One of the problems, therefore, is that we have no way of knowing if any letter sent by anybody relating to the crimes was actually sent by the murderer.
But many a household read the Chronicle letter with alarm, and women stayed indoors. The letter fanned the flames and led the press into a further frenzy of speculation. One report said it was feared that the maniac who perpetrated the horrific outrages in London had travelled to the north of England to continue his diabolical vocation.
The effect of the Ripper coming into a community outside of London we know from press reports, and we also know from press reports elsewhere, was quite profound, and people became very frightened. There would be a great sense of panic, and people were obviously discussed the crimes, but there had been suspicion in the pubs and so forth. People would be looking for other people behaving strangely or oddly. So the panic would have been quite great. It would have had a profound effect for the time that the fear lasted.
Around Birtley, there were daily alarms about mysterious strangers. Another local paper reported 2 men on their way to the colliery saw a man lurking about a spot known as the Brooms, and when they spoke to him, he disappeared. Much like the prime suspect, Wardell, but that was nothing new for him. He often disappeared, wandering off for days at a time. It turned out he'd been spotted the day after the killing, 15 miles away, at a place where he had relatives. But then he vanished. Maybe he was simply terrified that he was being hunted for a murder. Days later, he was arrested in the Borders, where he'd been living rough. People who knew Wardell described him as being a bit simple. He gave the police a false name, but when they asked him to write it down, he wrote his real name, proving he really wasn't the brightest. He was taken back to Tyneside by train, seemingly devastated by the accusation that he'd killed his sweetheart. When Wardell first appeared in court, he was a pitiful sight. A journalist wrote that he had to be carried into the dock with his head sunk onto his chest. The report said he never once looked up, but kept his eyes half closed. His mind seemed to be in a state of collapse. He was remanded to Durham jail to await trial, protesting his innocence all the while. At the trial, Jane Beardmore's own family said she and Wardell were sweethearts who never quarrelled. Then the events of her last evening were unfolded. Early in the evening, Jane had gone to a local farm to visit a friend. Wardell came with her as they walked along a footpath through the fields. Not long after, a woman fitting Jane's description was seen walking alone near the farm she'd been to, but there was another key piece of evidence to come. Later on, another witness saw someone they thought was Jane. This time she was with an unknown man. But whoever he was, the stranger swapped sides as he passed by, so his face couldn't be seen. There was not a single person who'd seen William Wardell with the victim in her final hours. The judge warned the jury to be very careful about sending a man to the gallows on such evidence, but the jury took just half an hour to find the accused guilty. Wardell supposedly made a 3-word confession on the eve of his death, but his family believed he'd been pushed into it by the Dean of Durham, who'd suggested that it might make things better for him in the next world. On the morning of the execution, Wardell's friends gathered in a lane next to the jail. They would have heard the chaplain intoning the service for the burial of the dead, I am the resurrection and the life. The gallows were in a wooden shed. The condemned man had the services of the country's top executioner, James Berry. His release from this world was clean and quick.
From the evidence that I've seen, it doesn't seem that Wardell should have been hanged for the crime. He seems to have protested his innocence right up until the end, and then we only have a third-hand claim that he admitted the crime later. It's a slightly odd crime for somebody who has never committed that crime to literally sort of try to eviscerate somebody. You normally, in a row or an argument, you'd kill somebody, but to actually try to mutilate them suggests that it would have been somebody else.
What kind of man could have done such a thing? Certainly the Ripper, who'd already killed 3 times, was capable of killing again. But who was Jack the Ripper? And could that person have been the mystery man in Gateshead? 5 or 6 names always come up every time the Ripper's identity is debated. When we looked at the potential suspects, we found new evidence about one name in particular, the Victorian artist Walter Sickert, and we also found a Tyneside connection.
But could a respectable painter really be the Ripper? And was he the link between the Whitechapel killings and the murder in Gateshead? We go inside the sometimes twisted mind of Walter Sickert after the break.
The world's greatest players in the most glamorous cricket tournament, exclusively live on ITV4 and ITV.com.
That is big. That is big. Could be the end. That is a brilliant catch.
Ball by ball.
Gets a look at this. Pops it out of the ground.
Over by over. Match by match.
This one's gone as well.
The Indian Premier League, live on ITV4 and ITV.com. Every day.
In a Katie affair at Craven Cottage, Fulham and Tottenham were inseparable in a goalless encounter. Only one team can make it through to the FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley.
Keepers are beatable.
Now they head to White Hart Lane in a match that must be decided on the night. A must-win FA Cup quarter-final London derby. Tottenham Fulham live, Wednesday at 7:30 ITV1. We are Football United.
I'm Steve Scott and you're with Nightwatch. Thanks for joining me. The name of Walter Sickert, the Victorian artist, has emerged in recent years as a candidate for the real identity of Jack the Ripper. During the Ripper's killing spree in Whitechapel, a prostitute was found murdered and mutilated in a similar fashion in the far north of England. Walter Sickert had connections to that area. Kim Inglis investigates whether it's further proof that the painter was also the Ripper.
Walter Sickert, the Impressionist painter, became a suspect primarily because he had discussed the crimes himself at various dinner parties and so forth, and at one point had also done a painting which he called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, which, as far as we know, is the painting of the bedroom in a flat that he lived in, where the landlord had told him that the previous occupant had been Jack the Ripper. He also told a story that he had been chased by some girls once when he was coming back from a music hall, and who'd shouted Jack the Ripper after him because he was wearing this long cape.
Late Victorians were fascinated by evil, and Walter Sickert was no exception. But did his darkest paintings reveal an even darker mind, a mind capable of terrible deeds? In his works, the poses of some of the women recall the way Ripper victims were found. Art experts believe there's something disturbing about them. Critics have said the faces of the women in these paintings are just violent smears, like the faces of murder victims. They just lie there while a male figure hovers over them in a menacing way. This is Sickert's self-portrait. Art experts say he painted himself with flaking skin and a mouth that barely exists, the face of a monster. But apparently he was a man of many faces. He adopted many looks throughout his life, changing his hair and style of clothes. He enjoyed dressing up and had a reputation among his friends as a master of disguise. One of his alter egos was a sailor, and a man dressed as a sailor had been seen in London at the scene of a Ripper murder. Intriguingly, there's a Tyneside link between Walter Sickert and the murder of Jane Beardmore. It was found by an amateur historian who stumbled across the information while researching the history of the River Tyne police.
What transpired was we had a situation where there have been at least 5 murders attributed to the Ripper in London, and between the 3rd and the 4th murder and the final murder there was a gap of well over a month. During this period, information was received that an Austrian seaman had sailed out of the River Tyne on board a Faversham-registered brigantine for a French port. It also transpired that the handwriting of the seaman in question, when he had signed articles on board the sailing ship, was said to be identical to the copies of some Ripper letters which 2 men had actually seen on board the ship, and also his description fitted with that of a witness who had seen the suspected Ripper leaving the scene of one of the murders. The sailor on board the Faversham ship was said to be Austrian. Sickert, in fact, was German. However, it could have been that he was trying to pass himself off as an Austrian instead of being a German. Sickert had connections with France. He had been to France before. The ship was in fact bound for France. Sickert also had connections with London and with Liverpool. The seaman in question also was said to have been to Liverpool and London before coming to the Tyne. And overall, there seems to be quite a lot of information, although circumstantial, seems to link Sickert as possibly being the seaman on board the Faversham registered ship.
Walter Sickert loved the theatre and followed the career of famous actress Ellen Terry. Sometimes he followed her tours, and it's believed she was playing on Tyneside around the time of Jane Beardmore's murder, giving him a motive to travel north. World-famous crime writer Patricia Cornwall has written a book on her theory that Sickert was indeed the Ripper. It hasn't been well received by Ripper experts, but our new evidence has got people talking.
The fact that there was a sailor sailing from the Tyne who seems only to have been suspected on the basis that his handwriting looked similar to one of the letters. And as far as we know, that was a judgment that was based almost primarily on his signature. So signatures are not really a very good basis to make comparisons. So it's one of those stories. They may have been right. People on the ground would have had a closer contact with the person, and so their judgments could have been spot on. But if there wasn't any evidence, then there would be nothing that they could do, and the story would just fade and die.
Sickert was also clever at disguising his handwriting. Now, thanks to modern forensic science, another part of the jigsaw is about to fall into place.
The interesting thing today is that a forensic document or a forensic paper examiner called Peter Bauer has analysed a set of paper and shown that a letter that was written by Walter Sickert to somebody and a letter that was written to the police purporting to be from Jack the Ripper. These letters come from the same small batch of paper, and he can prove that in fairly complex and technical ways. So although this hasn't been published yet, and so we can't subject it to any great degree of analysis, and that would tend to suggest that Walter Sickert's interest in the crimes was rather more than just the average person's, and that he was in fact writing letters to the police claiming to be the Ripper.
I believe that the theory that the seaman who sailed from the Tyne on board the sailing ship was in fact the true Ripper deserves as much credence as any of the other theories. And in fact, the link between this seaman and the fact that this was possibly Walter Sickert is in fact also very compelling. In fact, I wonder whether an innocent man actually hanged for a crime that he didn't commit.
William Wardell's only crime may have been that he wasn't smart enough to convince a court of his innocence. At the time, police thought they'd got their man. But did they?
Could Walter Sickert have been Jack the Ripper? Did the Ripper really strike on Tyneside? The evidence adds up, but the only person who would know is Jane Beardmore, who came face to face with the mystery, but didn't live to tell the tale.
Two serial killers from two different eras. Both men something of a mystery to this day. That's all from this edition of Nightwatch. Don't forget to join me next time. Good night.